When he saw the gray shadow in the underbrush, his breath caught because he realized, this was no accident. Dawn's pale light filtered through towering pines, casting long, trembling rays onto the mossy clearing. The scent of pine resin mingled with dew-soaked grass, and a string quartet's gentle strains drifted on the cool morning air. Everything was unfolding exactly as his daughter had insisted, white ribbons cascading from birch trunks, hand-carved benches arranged in a soft crescent, and delicate wildflowers strewn down a natural aisle. He stood just behind the last row of guests, the polished leather of his shoes pressing into the damp earth. His heart swelled at the sight of her, her gown's lace trim caught in early sunlight, her fingers trembling as she smoothed a curl behind her ear. She had chosen this spot because, she'd said, here, the forest feels like home, like we're part of something bigger. He remembered guiding her here as a child, her laughter echoing among the trees, her small hand clenched in his as they explored hidden clearings. Now she stood at the threshold of a new life, and he was both proud and profoundly unsettled. A faint rustle drew his gaze to the tree line. At first he thought a fox darting along the edge of the clearing, then a stray dog, or perhaps a lumbering moose passing unnoticed. His pulse quickened at the thought of any disturbance, but he told himself it was nothing more than forest creatures going about their day. Still, something about the motion was too deliberate, too measured for casual passing. He leaned forward, peering between the trunks. That's when he saw the eyes, yellow, calm, unblinking. They held him in place, as though assessing him. The underbrush parted, and a wolf stepped into the clearing, its coat a ripple of silver in the slanted light. It moved with a haunting grace, ears pricked, tail low but steady. The quartet faltered for a heartbeat, and an expectant hush settled among the guests. He wanted to shout a warning, to shoo the creature back into the forest. He imagined the headlines, wedding disrupted by wild animal. Yet his voice lodged in his throat. The wolf tilted its head once, regarding the human gathering with an inscrutable calm. It was neither hostile nor frightened, just present, as if summoned. Around him, guests exchanged uneasy glances. A bridesmaid's hand flew to her mouth, the best man stiffened, fingertips white against his tuxedo's lapel. The bride paused beneath the birch arch, her bouquet lowering as she met the wolf's gaze. The groom's jaw clenched, but he remained rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the animal before him. He had tracked wolves for decades, studying their packs, noting their movements, respecting their need for distance. Never had he witnessed such bold curiosity. His mind raced. Was it hungry? Was it sick? Or did it sense something deeper, something unseen that drew it here? The wolf took 3 measured steps forward, its paws whispering against the moss. Each guest held their breath. Sunlight caught in the creature's eyes, turning them molten gold. It paused beneath the arch, perfectly centered between bride and groom. The very air felt charged, electric. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his pulse drum against his palm. This was no random woodland encounter, this was something far more profound. He swallowed hard, voice caught somewhere behind his sternum. Around him, the forest seemed to lean in, as if eager to witness what would come next. He thought it would simply slink away, retreat into the shadows as any wild creature would. He expected the rustle of footsteps, the brief flicker of fur disappearing among the trees. But the wolf did not move. It sat on its haunches, regal and calm, as though it belonged here more than any of the guests. A branch creaked overhead, and a bird twittered, but the wolf's focus never wavered. He glanced at his daughter, the soft curve of her smile had vanished, replaced by awe. He saw tears glinting in her lashes. The groom's hand trembled around hers. A hush deeper than any before fell upon the clearing. In that moment, he realized that the day's ceremony, all the planning and vows, had been overshadowed by this singular miracle. Time stretched. The wolf let out a low, resonant exhale, and in that breath he felt the weight of centuries. The creature lifted its muzzle and released a single, clear howl, a sound neither frightening nor mournful, but intimate, almost human in its depth. The note reverberated through the pines, stirring something ancient within every listener. It was as if the forest itself had spoken its blessing. He blinked, expecting the wolf to bolt into the underbrush. But it remained, as still as a statue. His rational mind clamored for explanation, animal instinct, territorial display, curiosity, but his heart told him this was a benediction. A gift from the wilderness to his daughter and her new husband. He exhaled slowly, feeling a tremor run through him. He had always respected the wild, but never had he felt its embrace so directly. The wolf's howl faded, leaving a sacred silence in its wake. Then, with a final, unwavering glance, the creature stood and retreated, each step measured, each movement deliberate. When it vanished among the birches, the clearing seemed to exhale. Petals drifted to the ground like soft whispers. The quartet resumed, hesitant but reverent. Guests remained seated, spellbound, as if afraid to shatter the moment. He watched until there was nothing but empty moss and the fading echo of that extraordinary howl. He had thought it would simply leave. Like any other wild animal. But this one stayed. He did not flinch when the violin swelled, nor did he flinch at the soft murmur of whispered vows. The wolf remained unbothered by the melody, the hum of human presence, or the flicker of lanterns tied to birch trunks. He sat perfectly still at the edge of the clearing, each breath visible in the cool morning air, his golden eyes fixed on the bride beneath the floral arch. The father's hand hovered over his radio as if he might call for help, or order everyone to retreat, but he could not bring himself to speak. The creature showed no sign of aggression, no growl, no hackles raised, no retreat into the shadows. Instead, the wolf looked on with an almost reverent calm, as though he had come not to disrupt but to witness. The groom, standing beside the bride in a crisp navy suit, felt the tension too. He shifted his weight, stole a glance at the wolf, and then at his bride. Yet he did not flinch. His hand tightened around her bouquet, and in that grip lay a silent bond. They must not flee, they must simply be present. The ceremony resumed. The officiant spoke of love and commitment, his voice echoing among the pines. The wolf's gaze never wavered, not on the clustered guests, not on the quartet, but solely on the bride. Her ivory gown caught the early light, and her face shone with a mixture of joy and awe as she met the animal's calm stare. In that moment, it felt as if the forest itself had chosen her. Then the couple joined hands, their voices soft as they repeated their vows. And at that exact instant, the wolf raised his muzzle to the sky and howled. Not the high-pitched, frantic cry of alarm, but a low, sonorous lament that rolled through the trees like distant thunder. The sound was neither threatening nor mournful, it was ancient, a thread of music woven into the forest's heartbeat. Children gasped and pressed their palms to their mouths, their eyes wide. A clutch of flower girls froze mid-step, petals slipping from their tiny grasp. Even the birds fell silent, as though pausing to listen. The howl resonated deep in the father's chest, stirring memories of moonlit tracking trips and winter patrols when he had heard distant howls announce a pack's presence. But this howl was different. It carried neither fear nor anger. It held something like blessing, a primal acknowledgement that spoke of pack and family and sacred rites. The guests dared not move. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every leaf trembling in response to that single, reverberating note. When the sound faded, the wolf lowered his head, ears flicking once. He did not rush off, nor did he sit. He stood, regal and composed, as if weighing his next move. The father realized with mounting wonder that this was no mere wild instinct at play, but something far deeper, an invitation, perhaps, or a benediction. The officiant cleared his throat, voice trembling as he hastened to finish the vows. The quartet resumed, softer now, as if unwilling to disturb the lingering magic. The guests exhaled in unison, a collective release of held breath, and polite applause followed once the final, "I do," echoed through the grove. The bride and groom turned to face their guests, hands still clasped, eyes shining. The wolf remained at his post, as motionless as ever. The father swallowed hard, his mind racing through every possible rational explanation. He was scratched or injured and seeking refuge, he was curious, he was drawn by the scent of flowers. Yet no wound, no limp, no sign of pain marred the creature's posture. The wolf's gaze shifted once, flicking over the assembled crowd, but it did not rest on them. His focus was unwaveringly on the bride. She dipped her head slightly, acknowledging him in return. Their silent exchange sent a shiver through the forest. Then, as if his purpose was fulfilled, the wolf turned and walked away. His steps were smooth, deliberate, no fear, no rush, as if he strode through a throne room rather than a sun-dappled forest. He passed behind the last row of guests, his silhouette fleeting between trunks, and vanished into the dense green beyond. A breathless quiet blanketed the clearing. The quartet ceased mid-note, and the hush lingered until a lone bird burst into song. The guests clustered together, exchanging stunned looks, unsure what had just transpired. The father pressed a trembling hand to his daughter's back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of her breath. He thought it was simply coincidence. That the wolf had been startled by music, instinctively voicing his alarm. But if only he had known then that this was just the beginning. He remained until the very last note of the quartet had drifted into silence, as if tethered by some unseen bond to the ceremony unfolding before him. The wolf sat motionless beneath the birch arch, ears gently pricked forward, his golden eyes unblinking and solemn. The father, standing just behind the benches, felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized, the beast had not once blinked while watching the pair exchange their vows. All around, guests exchanged cautious glances. A bridesmaid's lips parted in a half-smile of disbelief. The best man, gripping his notes for the speech, dared not look away. Even the string players had paused, bows hovering above strings, hands trembling. Only the bride and groom seemed undisturbed, their faces alight with joy and wonder. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, a gentle murmur of applause broke out. But the wolf did not move. He sat like a statue carved from moonlight, still watching the newlyweds. The father's chest tightened. His ranger's instincts urged him to usher the creature off, to ensure his daughter's safety, but something deeper held him back. He could not tear his gaze from those unflinching eyes. Then came the moment every heart in that moss-carpeted clearing had been waiting for, the kiss. The bride and groom leaned into each other beneath the lace-draped arch, their lips meeting in a soft promise of forever. The hush deepened as the world seemed to pause. In that heartbeat of stillness, the wolf rose. He stood with a quiet dignity, spine straight, tail low but proud. His movement was fluid, almost ceremonial. The father watched breathlessly as the creature turned, each step deliberate, each pawfall silent on the damp earth. It was as if he were a royal guest taking his leave, acknowledged and honored. The bride broke from the kiss and turned toward her father, her cheeks glowing. "Dad," she whispered, eyes bright with tears, "this is a blessing." His throat tightened. He only managed to nod, unable to find words that could encompass the wonder of what they had just witnessed. The wolf paused at the edge of the clearing, looked back over his shoulder, and held the gaze of the bride for a lingering moment. The forest light caught the silver sheen of his pelt, and for an instant, he looked less a wild creature and more a guardian spirit. Then he vanished among the birches, slipping into the realm of shadows and secrets. A silence heavier than any before settled over the guests. Petals drifted to the ground like hushed exhalations. The father's heart pounded so loudly he feared it would echo through the grove. He glanced at the bride and groom, their hands still entwined, their faces radiant with the knowledge that something extraordinary had touched their day. Slowly, applause rippled through the crowd, tentative at first, then building in warmth and wonder. But the father barely noticed. He was still rooted to the spot, replaying every second, the unwavering stare, the regal departure, the soft rustle of fur against ferns. Later, as the reception began, he slipped away from the laughter and toasts. He returned to the altar where the wolf had sat, now empty but for the imprint of paw-shaped depressions in the moss. He knelt and pressed his fingertips into the soft earth, hoping to capture the memory of that moment forever. When he stood, he found his daughter waiting. She reached for his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "He looked at me as though he'd known me my whole life," she said, voice thick with emotion. He nodded, swallowing past the lump in his throat. They walked back along the aisle together, leaving behind the whispering guests and the flickering lanterns. The forest around them felt alive, every leaf and twig vibrating with the afterimage of the wolf's presence. The father realized then that his daughter's wedding had been more than a union of two lives, it had been a communion with something greater than themselves. Under a canopy of pines, he embraced her, tears slipping unbidden down his cheeks. He whispered into her hair, "He truly blessed you." And in that moment, he understood that the wild had spoken its own vows, of respect, of protection, of an ancient kinship that bound humans and beasts in a shared love for the world they all called home. He stood at the edge of the clearing long after the last lantern had dimmed, the laughter of the reception fading like echoes in the pines. In the hush of twilight, he allowed himself to travel back through time, to the moment when this very forest had first woven its threads around his life, and the life of a tiny wolf. He remembered the storm that had torn through the region when he was barely 30, felling ancient oaks and birches alike. He had been on patrol, boots sinking into mud, wind tearing at his jacket, when he heard the faint, desperate whine. Following the sound, he found a litter of pups, huddled beneath a shattered fallen trunk. One pup lay apart, shivering, its leg caught beneath the wood's weight. The others had vanished, frightened off or worse. Without a second thought, he knelt in the muck, heart pounding. The pup's golden eyes blinked once, then grew wide with fear as he lifted the trunk. Its tiny body was trembling so hard he feared he might drop it. But he cradled it against his chest and began the slow trek back through the shattered undergrowth. He recalled each step, the crack of splintered wood underfoot, the hiss of wind through broken limbs, the white flash of lightning overhead. He forced himself to breathe steadily so as not to jostle the pup, speaking to it in soothing tones he barely felt. When he finally reached his truck, he wrapped the wolf in his own coat and raced toward the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. In the weeks that followed, he visited daily. He watched the pup grow, from a fragile creature no bigger than a house cat into a strong adolescent wolf, fur full and eyes bright with curiosity. He learned to tell its whines apart, recognized the subtle tilt of its head when he spoke. And every morning, when he approached the enclosure, the wolf greeted him at the fence, tail wagging in a way more dog-like than feral. Then came the day they released him back into the wild. They drove deep into these woods before opening the crate. The wolf emerged cautiously, pausing just long enough to meet the ranger's eyes. There was gratitude there, the ranger swore later, something like understanding. Then the wolf turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving only a swirl of leaves drifting on the breeze. After that, life moved on. Children were raised, seasons turned, and he buried himself in his work. He told himself he had rescued a wild animal, not forged a bond. He thought he had done his duty, and that was the end of it. He had watched the forest change, too busy to notice its silent gratitude. And yet, he realized now, as he gazed at the clearing where his daughter had wed, that he had never truly forgotten. The memory had settled deep inside him, like an ember waiting to glow again. He had dismissed the idea of reunion as fanciful, a romantic notion unfit for a seasoned ranger. But the certainty with which the wolf had appeared that morning, and the way he had looked at his daughter, stirred a question he could not silence. He pressed a weathered hand to the rough bark of a birch beside him. This tree had grown up around the fallen trunk he had pried off the pup so many years ago. Life and death, ruin and renewal intertwined here. Perhaps the forest remembered, even if he tried to forget. Perhaps it carried the tale of a small life saved, and passed it on in its silent language of roots and leaves. He let his thoughts wander to that moment of release, the wolf's glance before he slipped away. It had been so direct, so laden with something he almost called farewell. What if, he thought, it was more than gratitude? What if it carried a memory of the one who had shown it mercy? He shook his head, trying to dispel the notion. It was impossible, he told himself. Wolves do not remember humans that way, they do not retrace their steps across years to appear at a wedding ceremony. Yet the certainty in the bride's voice, the reverence in the wolf's posture, the echo of that ancient howl, it all pointed towards something far beyond coincidence. A wolf coming back, he murmured into the dusk. No. Impossible. But his own voice betrayed him, catching on the final word. He tipped his head back and gazed at the sky dimming to indigo. The moon would rise soon, and with it, the pack's howls might fill the night. He thought back to that cold evening of release, remembering how the pup had stepped into the darkness, as if stepping into its fate. He took a slow breath, the cool air filling his lungs. He thought of his daughter beneath the floral arch, her wedding a promise of new beginnings. He thought of the wolf, regal as a king, blessing their union. He realized that the forest had given him more than he had ever known to ask for, a living testament that kindness echoes through time. As the first star appeared, he whispered, "If it was you, thank you." Then he turned and began the walk back to the cabin, each step measured, each rustle of leaves reminding him that in these woods, the past and present were bound together, and that some debts of the heart were never truly forgotten. A whisper of movement in the thicket made him pause. He peered into the half-light, half expecting to see silver fur. But there was nothing, only the hush of the forest, as if it held its own breath. And in that silence, he sensed the answer he both feared and longed for, that some connections run deeper than time, and that the wild remembers even when we think we have forgotten. A few days later, the family found themselves drawn back to the moss-strewn clearing before dawn, curiosity mixing with an undercurrent of unease. The bride and groom walked hand in hand, their laughter soft in the morning hush, while the father trailed behind, eyes scanning the tree line as though expecting silver shapes to slip between the trunks. He could still taste the echo of that otherworldly howl. When they rounded the final birch, they froze. Dozens of paw prints tracked across the soft earth, for distinct lines, side by side, each set staggered in size. One set was large and confident, the next almost as large, and two smaller, delicate imprints marked the presence of pups. The father knelt in the dew, pressing his fingertips into the grooves. They were fresh, no more than a night old. "A whole family," he whispered. The groom crouched to photograph the prints, breath clouding in the cool air. "They came back," he said, voice tight with awe. They marked the spot. The bride traced a paw print with a reverent fingertip. "They watched us again," she murmured. The father rose, heart pounding. He stared back toward the forest's edge, half expecting a stately return of the wolf and his kin. But the trees stood silent, only their shadows shifting in the pale light. He forced himself to step forward and brush aside a fern frond, then stepped back in surprise, another set of prints, skirting the edge of the clearing, as if the pack had walked the perimeter like silent sentinels. He snapped a photo of the ground, hands trembling. "I thought maybe it was coincidence," he confessed. "A passing pack, curious enough to inspect the place." But as he spoke, his rational explanations rang hollow. That evening, beneath warm lamplight, they gathered the wedding photos on the living room floor. Laughter still lingered in the air from the reception, but an uneasy hush fell as the father flipped through image after image of sunlit vows and petal-strewn aisles. Then he paused on a single shot, the bride and groom framed beneath the birch arch, the wolf's head ghosted over the groom's right shoulder, his yellow eyes shining as though illuminated from within. The room fell silent. The best man, standing behind the photographer, stepped closer, peering at the screen. "Is that?" he began, voice trailing off. Everyone leaned in. Even the youngest guest, a flower girl in pale pink, stared with wide eyes. The father zoomed in. The wolf's form was blurred at the edges, half merged with ferns, but those eyes, steady, calm, fixed on the couple, could not be mistaken. A cold shiver slid down his spine. "I thought it was just a trick of light," he said at last, swallowing hard. "A shadow, maybe, or a bad angle." He showed the image to his daughter. Her lips parted in awe. "It's him," she whispered. "He came back for us." They sent the photo to a private family chat. Replies poured in, emojis frozen on the screen, messages paused mid-typing. "No way, are you serious?" Those eyes, even the cousin who prided himself on skepticism fell silent, only reacting with a trembling thumbs up. That night, the father lay awake, the photograph glowing on his phone resting on the nightstand. He replayed the moment the wolf had vanished into the woods, remembered the echo of his departure. He thought of the paw prints, the mother and pups circling the clearing like guardians. He wanted to dismiss it all as a harmless coincidence, but his heart, and that picture, told another story. He whispered into the darkness, "What are you trying to tell us?" But only the hum of crickets answered. The next morning, he printed the photo in black and white and pressed it against the window, hoping the wind might carry it away. Yet when he turned back, the image stared up at him, unblinking. It felt as though the wolf's gaze had crossed time and distance to find him once more. He thought it a random shot, a trick of light, a coincidence. But the wolf's eyes in the photo, they were looking straight at him. A week after they discovered the paw prints, the newlyweds invited a friend to dinner, Dr. Elena Marquez, a wildlife biologist who specialized in canid behavior. The cottage's windows overlooked the birch grove, still dappled in golden dusk. Plates of pasta sat half-eaten on the table as Elena spread her field notes across the counter. "He wasn't just curious," she said, her pen tracing a line on a worn map of wolf territories. "That wolf, he performed a ritual." She tapped the spot where the wedding had taken place. "Wolves choose birthing dens with care, sheltered clearings, water nearby, vantage points to spot danger. They return to those sites year after year." The father leaned in, elbows on the table, his wedding speech rehearsal forgotten. "You mean," he said, voice low, "our ceremony happened in one of those sacred locations?" Elena nodded. "Exactly. You and your daughter walked into what a wolf pack considers a cradle for new life." She flipped to photographs of wolf dens, moss-lined hollows beneath root flares, gentle depressions where pups first opened their eyes. The pack marks these with scents, vocalizations, even communal howls. They guard them fiercely. The groom swallowed. "So when that wolf appeared, it wasn't an accident?" "No," Elena said. "He came to acknowledge your union in the same way a pack acknowledges a new member. By sitting through the ceremony, by howling at your vows, he was performing a blessing ritual." She tapped the photo of the blur of ferns and yellow eyes behind the couple's shoulders. "That isn't hostility. It's invitation." A hush fell as the truth settled in. The father closed his eyes, recalling the wolf's steady gaze, the unblinking watchfulness, even when the string quartet struck their brightest chord. It was more than tolerance, it was acceptance. Elena continued, "Imagine a community huddled around the birth den, each wolf taking turns on watch. They circle, sometimes silently, sometimes with low vocalizations, to protect the pups and the future of their lineage. Your wedding coincided with one of those protective vigils. He didn't chase you away, he welcomed you in." The bride reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her neck. "So when I said it felt like blessing," her voice caught. It really was. We came to be married, the groom said softly, and he blessed us. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Elena smiled, folding her notes. You honored a place sacred to the pack. In turn, the pack honored you. You became part of their circle, not as intruders, but as members, witnesses to a covenant older than any human tradition. The father's chest tightened. He thought back to the low lament of that howl, the way the wolf had risen and left with such quiet dignity. He realized he had assumed wilderness and humanity were separate realms, each with its own rites. But nature's ceremonies were as rich, perhaps richer, than any church's. That night, the family returned to the clearing once more, guided by moonlight through the silent birches. The bride carried a single white candle, its flame trembling against the dark. The groom followed with Elena, flashlight casting long shadows behind them. The father hesitated at the arch of ribbons, feeling the earth pulse under his boots. They stopped where the wolf had first appeared. The mother of the pack, Elena explained, would have chosen this place for shelter and safety. He knelt and pressed his palm into the dewy moss, sensing the centuries of gatherings that had taken place here, not only for pups, but for rites of passage and renewal. The bride lit the candle and set it on a flat stone. To honor our guardians, she said, voice steady. She closed her eyes, and the flame's glow revealed tear tracks on her cheeks. The wind sighed through the branches, and somewhere distant, a faint wolf's cry answered. It was a single note, soft, approving, ancient. The father felt his daughter tremble beside him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We came to be married, he whispered, and they blessed us. In that moment, human and wild stood on common ground. No fence separated them, no language barrier. Just a shared understanding born of respect and courage. The candle flickered, echoing distant stars, and the clearing held its breath, cradling them in its timeless ritual. They stayed until the flame guttered, then departed in silence, unedited by fear, united by gratitude. As they walked back through the birches, the father glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see golden eyes watching. But there was only darkness, hushed and holy, carrying the promise that somewhere in those woods, a pack had welcomed them into its ancient fold. A year had passed since the forest bore witness to vows, and in that time the couple's hearts had grown with the arrival of a daughter. They named her Mira, after the star that shone brightest in midsummer skies. The father watched his little girl learn to crawl on soft rugs and babble her first words, each milestone a private triumph. Yet something in him longed to return to the place where two families, human and wild, had become one. On a crisp spring morning, with Mira bundled against a gentle breeze, the trio set out for the birch clearing. The bride, now a mother, carried her daughter in a woven sling, the groom walked at her side, camera safely tucked away. The forest greeted them with dappled sunlight and the fresh scent of new growth. Every step felt auspicious, as though the woods themselves were anticipating their arrival. When they reached the familiar mossy carpet, Mira giggled and reached her chubby hand toward a drifting petal. The bride knelt to set the little girl down, and the father scanned the tree line with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He half expected to see silver fur among the green, but saw only swaying trunks and the flutter of birds. Then he heard it, a single, distant howl. It rose and fell like a slow breath, carrying a gentle resonance through the pines. He froze, heart hammering. The first howl faded, and for a heartbeat all was still. Then, softer, higher, two smaller howls answered, echoing like laughter from unseen pups. The children's chorus trembled through the grove, tender and curious. No wolf appeared in sight, yet their presence was undeniable. The father felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The bride reached for his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Myra's tiny face tilted upward as if she, too, heard the unseen voices. The groom crouched to scoop Mira into his arms, and she let out a delighted squeal. "They're congratulating us," the bride whispered, lips brushing her husband's shoulder. Her voice was fragile with wonder. "They're with us today, too." The father closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. It was not threatening, these were not cries of warning or distress, but notes of welcome, soft and intimate. He imagined the pack standing just beyond the tree line, the great wolf who had first appeared, the mother who had walked beside him, and the pups who had completed their circle of life. Together, they sent their song across the clearing, blessing the birth of a new life. For a moment, time stilled. The silver bark of the birches gleamed in the light, and a single petal drifted down to rest at Myra's tiny foot. The father reached out and stroked the little girl's cheek, marveling at how much life could grow from a single act of kindness. He remembered the howl at his daughter's wedding, the ritual that had bound them all. Now, the forest offered a new rite, the celebration of family, human and beast entwined. Mira clapped her hands, and the bride laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. The groom swept them both into a gentle embrace beneath the birches, hearts full with awe. No camera could capture this moment fully, no words could describe its depth. It was a communion of souls, a testament that some truths are felt rather than spoken. As they prepared to leave, the father lingered a moment longer, letting the pine-scented breeze fill his lungs. He gazed into the shadows, half expecting to glimpse a silver shape slipping away. But the forest remained still, save for the rustle of leaves and the soft echo of distant howls fading with the dawn. Hand in hand, they walked back along the winding path, Mira lulled to sleep by the forest's lullaby against her father's chest. The bride paused to look back once, a contented smile touching her lips. "If your heart is skipping a beat right now, you know. Subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the truth that can't be explained by words." He stayed behind long after the guests had drifted back to the cabin, their laughter and murmur fading into the dusk. The clearing, once filled with celebration, lay empty beneath the rising moon. Crickets began their steady chorus, and the scent of damp moss rose from the earth. He walked to the old oak at the edge of the meadow, the one whose gnarled roots curled like sleeping serpents. There, he sank down, pressing his back against the rough bark. The wind sighed through the branches, and a solitary twig snapped somewhere above him, startling in the hush. He closed his eyes, listening to the small sounds, the hiss of a nocturnal bird, the rustle of leaves brushing against each other, the soft shifting of earth as small creatures stirred in the undergrowth. It felt as though the forest itself were holding its breath. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. In that silence, he thought he could feel another breath beside him, slow, steady, deep. His heart pounded, but he did not turn. He would not risk shattering the moment. Instead, he pressed his palms to his mouth and spoke into the darkness in a voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you." No response came, only the whisper of wind and the distant cry of an owl. He opened his eyes and looked around, but the clearing was empty. The lanterns had long since been extinguished, and the ribbons hung limp on the birches. The moss looked untouched, except for the faint depressions where the wolf had sat. He drew in a deep breath of damp air and let it go slowly. He had thought the ceremony's magic had ended when the last hoof of the wolf faded into the trees. He had believed that once the pack had performed its blessing, the bond would settle into memory, and nothing more would stir. "I thought it was over," he murmured, voice cracking in the quiet. He stood, dusted earth from his trousers, and brushed his hands on his shirt. The oak's roots creaked as if shifting beneath the weight of memories. He took one last look at the clearing, at the place where human vows and wild rites had intertwined, and turned toward the path home. But that night, sleep was elusive. He lay in his bed, eyes open in the dark, the photograph of the wolf's golden gaze pinned to his bedside table. When he finally drifted into dreams, he found himself back in the clearing. The moon hung like a silver coin high above, and the air smelled of pine and promise. He sat by a crackling fire, its flames warm and orange against the cool night. He heard footsteps on soft earth and looked up without surprise. There, beside him, sat the wolf. His coat glimmered in the firelight, and his yellow eyes, with their calm intelligence, were fixed on the dancing embers. He did not look fierce or wild, he looked like an old friend come to share the night. The father raised a hand in greeting. The wolf tilted his head, ears twitching, and exhaled a breath that smelled of cedar and moss. No words passed between them, but the man felt an overwhelming surge of connection. He knew the wolf had come not as predator, not as intruder, but as companion. He felt gratitude, and something deeper, peace. They sat together in silence, watching the flames lick the night sky, until the embers dimmed and the wolf rose. Without a howl or a bark, he turned and slipped away into the shadows, leaving only the faint echo of his presence. The man stood, hands folded over his heart, and whispered into the stillness, "Until we meet again." He awoke with the dawn, the ritual of morning light filtering through his curtains. He lay still for a moment, the dream vivid in his mind, the warmth of the fire, the steady breath beside him, those unwavering eyes. He knew, then, that the forest story with his family was far from finished. Somewhere out there, beneath the old oaks and birches, the wolf watched, waiting for their next chapter to begin. He unfolded the photograph with trembling fingers and pressed it against the light from the cabin window. There, caught in mid-vow, stood the bride and groom beneath the birch arch, and just behind them, impossibly, the wolf's silver head peering over the groom's shoulder. His yellow eyes shone like embers. He stared at the image until the edges softened, then cleared his throat and spoke as though confessing to an unseen congregation. "I don't know who he was, or what he has become. But he did something no human could ever do, he gave my daughter what you cannot buy or beg, the respect of nature." The words fell into a hush, carried on the breath of memory. He set the photo down and rose, slipping on his boots. The cabin door creaked behind him as he stepped into the chill of early spring dawn. The forest greeted him with a tapestry of green and gray, budding leaves, damp earth, and the faint, unfamiliar trill of migrating songbirds. He breathed deeply, the scent of moss and pine filling his lungs. He had not hunted since that miraculous day. He had not felled a single tree. He told himself that the forest had done him a kindness by revealing its secrets, he repaid it by ceasing to harm it. His rifle rested unused in the corner of the cabin, its weight now alien in his hands. Instead, each spring, he made the pilgrimage to the moss-covered clearing where the wedding had been blessed. He followed the narrow trail, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He carried nothing but a small loaf of bread and a flask of water, offerings to the place, tokens of gratitude. With each step, he remembered the wolf's regal departure, the slow lift of the muzzle, the deliberate turn of the head, the dignified stride into the shadowed woods. When he reached the arch, now draped in fresh spring vines, he laid the bread on a flat stone at its base. He knelt and pressed his palm into the cool moss, feeling its pulse beneath his fingertips. He closed his eyes and listened. The forest was nearly silent, save for the distant drip of melting snow and the soft moan of the breeze through budding branches. He waited, the memories settling around him like petals on water. After a long moment, a howl drifted through the trees. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, a single, low note that carried the weight of many seasons. He opened his eyes and scanned the tree-line, but saw only swaying birch trunks and dappled light. He stood slowly, eyes glistening. He tucked the loaf into his jacket pocket and began to walk home. Each year, he took the same route, marking the slight shifts in the forest's tapestry, a fallen branch here, a new sapling there. Sometimes, as he crossed a small creek, he paused to peer into the water's surface, half expecting to see a flash of silver fur. One spring morning, he arrived to find the arch empty of vines, stripped clean, save for a single strand of moss draped across the top. He knelt and touched it, mind racing with questions. Then, just as he rose, a soft rustle sounded behind him. He turned, breath-catching, but saw only sunlight filtering through leaves. A heartbeat later, a faint echo of a howl drifted away. He exhaled a quiet laugh. He could not say for certain that the wolf returned each year. No footprints marked the ground, no fur lay tangled in the brush. Yet in that whisper of a call, he felt the presence of the creature that had changed him, that had blessed his family. He carried that gift with him, woven into his very bones. At home, he placed the photograph on the mantel beside his daughter's wedding invitation, framed by wildflowers he'd pressed between its glass. He traced the wolf's eyes with his fingertip, then bowed his head. In his eyes was a wisdom, he murmured to the empty room, such that I wanted to apologize for all we do to this world. He paused, letting the words settle like seeds in fertile soil. He thought of the forest's silent sentinel, of the ritual that transcended language, of the bond forged between human heart and wild spirit. He resolved to honor that bond every day, by living lightly on the land, by teaching his granddaughter, when she was old enough, to read the stories written in laurel and lichen, by listening for the wolf's voice in the hush of dawn. Spring passed to summer, and he grew older, hair silver at the temples, skin lined with years. Yet each year, he returned, always alone, to the clearing where nature's benediction had been bestowed. And each year, as he laid his simple offering on the stone, he listened for the echo of a howl, faint as a sigh, certain that somewhere beyond the birch trunks, eyes of gold watched him still. He would never know the wolf's true name or origin. He would never learn the fate of that pup he had rescued so many years ago. But he carried the memory of that glance, steady, unblinking, full of ancient kindness, deep within him. It was a story without words, a gift beyond measure. This could never have happened, he whispered to the forest, voice trembling with gratitude. But I was there. I saw it. He blessed us. And for a moment, the trees trembled in reply, and the world held its breath. If your heart is full of awe, comment, nature is wiser than us.